Watch this.
People understood what we get as UW medical students and what we hope to bring back to Idaho. You know, they would see that this is one of Idaho's greatest investments.
Idaho's connection to a regional medical school is in the waiting room, which is why WWAMI students are worried. Another dig at drag shows, this time forcing them to cover up their curves, even though event organizers say they already do. Access to absentee ballots almost got a little more arduous. After years of trying to take away options to in-person voting, lawmakers finally took a stand against the thought that voting shouldn't be easy. Idaho is worst in the country when it comes to how many doctors we have per capita. It doesn't help that Idaho doesn't have its own medical school, at least one that licenses MDs, which is why 53 years ago, the Gem State joined the WWAMI program, a partnership between the University of Washington School of Medicine, Wyoming, Alaska, and Montana, 3 other states without a medical school. It was a chance for Idahoans who wanted to be doctors to have access to that education and clinical rotation training. Idaho started with 10 students in 1972, upped it to about 40 per year, or to exactly 40 per year back in 2016. And right now, there are more than 250 clinical clerkships across the state, places to get hands-on learning from actual doctors. Idaho has had 747 graduates of the WWAMI program. 367 of those have practiced or are currently practicing in the Gem State. That's a return rate of 51%, a number that will likely go up over the next few years now that Idaho requires Idaho students who enroll in the WWAMI program to return and practice in the state for at least 4 years. Yet, there's been a push this session to pull the plug on that medical school partnership and create another from scratch with the University of Idaho, or Utah, excuse me. House Bill 176 made it out of committee nearly 2 weeks ago. And say it with me, despite overwhelming opposition. Well, one of those opposed is a Boise State grad who was accepted into WWAMI 2 years ago. He told us today the impact the program has had on him and the quest to improve healthcare access in Idaho.
I wanted to try something. It sounded kind of fun.
For Graf Kirk, his career path pivoted while studying engineering at BSU.
I wanted to be a doctor the first time I did a physical exam on a patient. I was an emergency medical technician.
Now a second-year medical student at the University of Washington.
It's just a really magical thing when you get to participate in that.
Graf learned about House Bill 176 in an email from his dean.
I was just studying for my Step 1 board exam when I got it, and
What'd you think?
I'm really shocked. This is such a phenomenal program, and if folks knew what this program did and the kind of physicians it trained and the resources that we had access to because we were UW students, I don't think we'd be facing this bill at all. Part of our training is going around the WWAMI region for those clerkships. So I get to do some in Seattle. I get to do some here in Boise. I have the opportunity to go to Alaska and anywhere in the WWAMI region. When you move around and see that many different hospital systems, you get really, really good at dealing with things that are like unpredictable.
I want you to think about our overall objectives in Idaho with medical education, and that is to have quality.
The WWAMI bill,
to increase capacity, and also the cost benefit to the state,
would remove Idaho from the UW Medical School Co-op for 2 reasons. One, Idaho wants more spots in the program.
One of the issues with that is that in order to train a student like me, you need to have other physicians who can take students on in their practice and teach them internal medicine and surgery and obstetrics and gynecology. It's difficult to expand that capacity when there's so few physicians in Idaho already. So that's been a barrier to expanding the WWAMI program in Idaho.
The second reason that you've heard that they want to do this is what?
So that's more about a political debate about abortion.
The University of Washington Medical School is stridently pro-abortion, and the state of Idaho's contract with the University of Washington through the WWAMI program is a violation of Idaho law.
Idaho lawmakers want a guarantee. Gem State money won't be paying for medical students to perform abortions.
There are, I think, two problems with that line of thinking. One is that our tuition dollars don't go to students like me performing abortions.
A fact backed up by a UW vice dean.
And I can reassure you that no Idaho funds are used for abortion care or abortion training.
But also,
I took my board exam a couple weeks ago, and abortion medications are on there. It's important for us to learn about those medications and those procedures in order just to become a doctor. Even if I'm never going to participate in an abortion, I want to know about this, because if I have a patient who has come in and had an abortion recently, I don't want to be Googling what mifepristone is or misoprostol.
I think one of the arguments I heard was that it isn't a good, we're not getting back what we put in. Do you buy that?
Not at all. Not only is WWAMI a really good program to allow Idaho students to stay in Idaho for their training, but it exposes all of those other states. You know, it exposes Wyoming, it exposes Washington students to Idaho, and that helps recruit to Idaho residencies. They're going to rank those higher because they've been there. And you know, you don't get to fall in love with Idaho until you've been here and got to see it a little bit.
So the return rate of Idaho students in WWAMI is 51%. But when you include WWAMI students from other states that spend clinical rotation time in Idaho, as you heard Graf talk about, that return rate jumps to 72%. Considering Idaho pays about half of the program's tuition per student, which is about $84,000 a year, that tuition, I should say. Critics of the bill say it's a pretty decent return on investment, especially if the goal is to increase the number of doctors in Idaho. Without WWAMI, that number will likely get worse. House Bill 176 is still waiting a debate on the House floor. We tried to ask the bill's sponsors about it today, and we were told, well, that bill could be going through some changes, so we'll stay tuned. 4 years ago, in the middle of a pandemic and on the heels of what many called a stolen election, even though it wasn't, Idaho's legislature tried to make it a crime for anyone to drop off more than 2 absentee ballots at a time. Well, during the debate on that bill, House Speaker Mike Moyle, who was then House Majority Leader, he said, you know what? Voting shouldn't be easy. Well, that ballot harvesting bill died in the House that day, but since then, there's been some attempt to limit how or who can use an absentee ballot. There's a number of reasons someone would request an absentee ballot. Maybe they're going on a vacation on Election Day, overseas serving in the military, or maybe in a care facility. Or maybe it's just because it's easier than dealing with the hassle of Election Day. But House Bill 139 wants to narrow that even more, a limiting list of specific reasons. Bill sponsor Joe Alfieri says broadening the use of absentee ballots opens up to potential voter fraud in Idaho, something that really hasn't happened in Idaho. Hunter Funk sat in on the hearing, which ended up more like a harmonious plea.
And I have a question.
There was a chorus of testimony.
What's it all about, Alfieri? Is it just 'cause there might be some fraud? What's it all about when you sort it out, Alfieri? Do you mean to decide who can vote?
So what is this bill all about, Alfieri?
So the biggest problem with the absentee ballot is that you don't have a chain of custody. We don't know for a fact where that ballot came from.
He says in-person voting is easy to verify. You stand in front of the clerk, provide your identification, and submit your ballot at the site, making it easy to confirm you are who you say you are.
Absolutely secure process.
As for an absentee ballot, he says it's where potential voter fraud could happen.
Is the clerk a forensic writing expert? Can they absolutely, with 90% accuracy, verify that ballot? We don't know that for certain. We also don't know if that person who is filling out that ballot is being influenced by somebody else.
But among those testifying against the bill,
Secretary of State Phil McGrain,
the man responsible for running Idaho's election.
I don't think this legislation achieves the intended result. It doesn't increase the security of absentee balloting at all. It merely reduces the access to absentee balloting.
McGrain says a majority of Idahoans voted early and in person, but of the 5.3% of Idahoans who absentee voted in the primaries, 2/3 would not be allowed to vote according to this legislation.
This is one of those tools for people whose lives just don't align with being able to show up to the polls on Election Day.
McGrain says it's important to make voting easy for everyone to participate in. As for the concerns about signature fraud, McGrain says each clerk attends a forensic signature verification training, and some of those ballots do get rejected due to signature inconsistencies.
I will say a rejection is either someone didn't sign their absentee ballot or a spouse signed the other ballot, and you still can't count it in that case.
With a long discussion, 2 motions were brought forth.
I move to send House Bill 139 to the floor with a do pass recommendation.
My substitute motion would be that we hold House Bill 139 in committee, and I would ask for a roll call vote.
For both motions, there was a 7-7 tie, meaning it failed in committee.
Committee, that's all for today. We're adjourned.
And while absentee ballots weren't on the list for concerns for Secretary of State, when it comes to election fraud, now there was an RS introduced today in the committee. It's for an election data cleanup. It's to make sure voter rolls are accurate, meaning ensuring non-citizens, those who have died or live in a different state, aren't in the system. That was approved to be printed and it will be read in committee.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's already a thing where they kind of go through the voter rolls and clean it out. I think they did that before the last general election.
Yeah, and I guess we'll see what happens with this one, if there is anything specifically different with that one. But that was one thing that he was saying, well, this is what we want to make happen, so.
Maybe it happens more frequently with this new one. We'll see. All right, thank you very much, Hunter. All right, are Idaho kids being exposed to sexual performances at public events? The promoters of a new bill seem to think so. House Bill 230 would prohibit, quote, indecent sexual exhibitions in public places where minors might be present. An idea that might sound familiar to you because the same bill sponsors attempted to pass this back in 2023. Well, they're going for it again. Here's Aspen Shumpert.
No parent wants to be walking along the street, visiting their local public park, and stumble upon one of these types of performances. And that has happened.
House Bill 230 aims to prohibit certain performances considered sexual in public places where minors may be present.
So back in 2022, we were seeing a bunch of drag shows and other sexual exhibitions taking place across the state of Idaho.
The nonprofit Christian ministry Idaho Family Policy Center points to a few pride events across Idaho when explaining the need for this legislation that requires hosts, event organizers, and performers to restrict children's access to sexual exhibitions, and anyone found to violate the law could be sued in civil court by the minor or their guardian.
Whether that's indecent drag performances, whether that's indecent, strip teases, or indecent pole dancing or burlesque. Those types of indecent performances would not be allowed over daytime television broadcast. And so all we're doing is applying that same standard to public parks and other places where kids might be present.
Local Pride Festival organizers see the bill's intent differently.
This bill is just a true act of intimidation against LGBTQ folks that we've seen time and time again by folks who really have very limited understanding of what it is like to be a part of the LGBTQ community.
It's a blatant attack on this community. We know that. You'd have to be blind to not see that.
Kanzati argues both Canyon County Pride and Boise Pride have allowed minors access to shows that engage in sexual conduct, which is defined in the bill as simulated or actual sexual activity, sexual explicit depictions, or provocative dances using accessories that exaggerate sexual characteristics.
We don't let kids around strip clubs, we don't let kids around adult movie stores, and we shouldn't allow sexual exhibitions to take place in public parks where kids might be present.
Wheeler with Canyon County Pride disputes Kanzati's characterization of their festival as inappropriate for families.
Are we doing strip teases at this event? We are not. Again, I think there's such a misconception by folks who've never attended such joyful family event called Pride that think we're doing all of these inherently sexual things that we're not. If you've ever taken your family to Disneyland and seen various characters running around Disneyland, you've seen drag. And last year, for example, we had Dora and SpongeBob perform a very family-friendly performance.
Boise Pride Executive Director Williamson says these accusations are coming from people who've never attended Pride events.
Something being sexualized is a individual problem, I can sit here with 10 other people and look at a piece of art. 4 or 5 of them might find it a very sexualized piece, and the other 6 of us looking like, what the hell are you talking about? What's offensive to one is not necessarily offensive to everybody else. So we should stay away from trying to write policies that legislate people off of personal religious beliefs that are meant to govern everybody in the state.
Bill sponsors argue that this legislation uses the same indecency standard utilized by the federal government to determine whether content is appropriate for daytime television. And Pride organizers say nothing is happening at their events that you wouldn't see on Prime TV. Now, again, Brian, we have seen a similar bill come into the legislature in 2023, and it died in the Senate. So this bill in 2025 just passed the House and making its way to the Senate. So we'll see if it gets any further this time around.
All right, I have a comment and a question for Blaine Canzati. First of all, have you seen daytime television anytime soon? Because we've seen it. It's in our newsroom every once in a while, and it gets pretty risque, I might say that. So I don't know what that parameter is. Secondly, the 2022, summer of 2022 we referred to, there was a performer up in Coeur d'Alene that was accused of exposing themselves. But that was proven to be false. It was all fabricated, and then winning a $1.1 million lawsuit because of it. So I don't know that anybody just stumbles across a burlesque performance in a park these days. It's really hard to find. All right, thank you very much, Aspen. From an infamous murder case, the one of Brian Kohberger, to the famous comedian Chelsea Handler skiing in summer togs at Soldier Mountain, there's a lot to cover, or uncover as it were, around the 208. Abby Wilt tells us all about it in today's 411.
Brian Kohberger's defense team is trying to remove the death penalty by arguing that Kohberger may be on the autism spectrum. But it's hard to tell because we can't see the specific details of the motion right now. We also don't know if Kohberger has ever been diagnosed or tested for autism spectrum disorder. He's accused of fatally stabbing 4 University of Idaho students in November of 2022. His trial is set for August 11th. Starting July 1st, you'll have to pay a $300 mandatory minimum fine if you're caught with 3 ounces or less of marijuana. Governor Brad Little officially signed House Bill 7 into law on Monday. As of this afternoon, Governor Little has signed 7 bills into law this session. The deadline for him to sign the Idaho Parental Choice Tax Credit bill is tomorrow, just before noon, or else it slides into law without his John Hancock. Today, the Senate sent the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Debbie Critchfield's school funding formula bill to the 14th order for revisions. Remember, this bill changes the distribution of discretionary funding for public schools to follow the student and recognize actual costs for the needs of each student. It's very similar to Representative Wendy Horman's bill, which she introduced after Critchfield's. That bill is still waiting for a public hearing in committee. Everyone rejoice! Eagle Fun Days are back, thanks to a city council meeting. And the fireworks are too. They just need to lock down a location. The biggest change is the date. Now the event is on June 27th and 28th, still at Eagle High School and Eagle City Hall. The City of Eagle has made a motion to keep the Wet and Wild parade, but with plans to increase security. A familiar face took over a familiar Idaho mountain on February 16th. Comedian Chelsea Handler celebrated her 50th birthday skiing scantily clad on Soldier Mountain with her friends. We hope they stayed warm. And that's the 411 on the 208. I'm Abby Wilt.
We have been enjoying a beautiful Wednesday across the region. Nothing but sunshine overhead and comfortable temperatures. Boise sitting right now at 53 degrees. Twin Falls in the upper 40s, upper 30s with blue skies over Payette Lake and McCall. Gorgeous in Sun Valley as well, sitting at 37 degrees. The warming temperatures, though, are still contributing to snow melt across the region, and that is still also contributing to rising levels on the Malheur River near Vail, Oregon, where a flood warning remains in effect, though I believe at this point the river has crested and is on the way back down, but still we expect the flooding to be a concern for the next several days. So through Saturday afternoon, we'll keep that flood warning in effect. Elsewhere across the region, you can see a very quiet Wednesday afternoon. Some clouds creeping into the Pacific Northwest. It'll be clear for us for several days to come as high pressure remains in control. So the rest of your evening, really nice. Our sunset tonight, 6:30. After that, we'll drop pretty quickly down into the 40s. We'll have another cold morning tomorrow and a breezy afternoon, but the winds tomorrow out of the south, and that will help propel our temperatures into very warm territory once again. A day where you'll want the nice warm coat in the morning, though, will drop down into the upper 20s to around 30 degrees in the Treasure and Magic Valleys, single digits for Stanley, teens in McCall. But look at our afternoon tomorrow. Tons of sunshine, highs warmer than today, flirting with 60 degrees in Boise tomorrow afternoon. We stay very comfortable to wrap up the work week and the month on Friday. A little bit of a rain chance sneaks in by Sunday, but still pretty pleasant temperatures all the way into next week.
All right, welcome back. Let's get to your comments. We've got a pretty long one here to start us off. This one says, seriously, legislators, can you please tackle issues that are actual issues that constituents want addressed? We hear this almost every day. Affordable health care, increased education funding, providing a welcoming environment for healthcare students and providers. As an ally who has attended numerous Pride events, I have never witnessed anything remotely obscene. Focus on real issues, says Melissa. Meanwhile, this guy, Susan, also says there are so few doctors in Idaho already. It takes weeks, if not months, to get an appointment for a primary care physician. Of course, our legislature is going to stop the WWAMI program, or at least try to. I thought these people were elected to work for us, not against us. Going back to these events in the park, if you stumble upon something you don't like in a park, or on TV, radio, or social media, just scroll on or change the channel. Walk on. There's nothing nefarious happening during these Pride events, says Kelly in Boise. All right, the question is, what's the difference in training at ICOM Medical School or through WWAMI? One is a DO, a doctor of osteopathic, and one is just a straight-up medical doctor. I'm not an expert on those, but I know there's a difference, so it's not the same thing. But there was talk of partnering up with ICOM to make this happen. It's not about the number of slots Idaho gets in the medical program. The legislature can't stand a partnership with a blue state university. Their stance on Medicaid shows their lack of concern about access to health care, says David in Boise. Does Idaho compensate future Idaho doctors for coming back and investing 4 years of work here? No, but if they don't, they have to pay about $120,000. Is skiing scantily clad the same as sexually explicit actions in a public place? Chelsea Handler rented the whole mountain for herself, so it's private.
Continue with us and watch free now on the KTVB Plus app everywhere you stream.